Good morning. I'm here at this cemetery where they have this gun on display. It's from World War II, but it's very similar to one that the French invented in the 1880s. Because in the 1880s, the French had a problem. They had been defeated just 10 years before by their bitter rival, and they didn't like it. And one of the things they recognized was that when you had a cannon, if you remember your historical films, when you fired it, it shot backwards and you had to run it back up and re-aim it. What if you could have a mechanism on that gun that would accept the recoil and keep the gun in place? And that's what they invented. And by the 1880s, they had invented this tube, which has a bunch of machinery in it that's able to accept the shock of sending forth a projectile of the size that this cannon does. Right here. This was it. And if you stood that cannon from the 1880s next to this one, you'd see they're very similar. It was that good an invention, and it was revolutionary. Because the engineers knew that it wasn't if there was going to be recoil, they knew that there was recoil. It was just how do you deal with it? And they dealt with it right here. And they were proud to put this on. As a matter of fact, this was a state secret in France for a long time because it was so important to them. They knew you had to deal with the shock of firing this cannon. And they did. The fact is, you and I know that there's shock in our everyday lives. Sometimes a quick shock, sometimes longer ones when we have to deal with epidemics, for example. But the fact is that it's not whether there's going to be shock in our life, it's how are we going to deal with the shock we know is coming. And in our own personal lives, just like in the lives of those we help, we recognize that that is an important factor, and it's not one to be treated lightly. This mechanism is out for all to see, and as a matter of fact, the engineers were proud of it. Our mechanism is harder to see, and in fact, discounted by some. But you and I know that our own personal lives, if we don't deal with that shock, if we don't deal with the stress that happens in our everyday lives, from preparing for an exam to dealing with social disruptions, that it misplaces us. Just like if this wasn't here, the cannon would be misplaced. It displaces us and makes us less effective. But when we are overt about it, when we use the mechanisms that we know work to help us deal with the stresses in our lives, we're more effective as well. Now, in some ways, I hate showing implements of war to illustrate that, but the fact is that the engineers were upfront about their need to deal with it. Well, you and I need to be too. The more overt we are in our ability to deal with the stresses that we know affect us, the better we'll be, and the better example will be for those around us. Because make no mistake, as we are able to deal with the shocks and stresses of our lives, we show that it's possible. And the better we're able to do it, the better we're able to transmit it. Well, that makes a better world for everyone, doesn't it? And, well, it sounds a bit utopian, but maybe if we were all better with it, we'd need fewer of these.